Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Tuesday, May 27th, 2025, episode 398, and we're going to talk about America's hypocrisy problem. So, yeah, this is a topic that I have been thinking about for a while, but I decided to do it primarily because of a story that I heard today. I was listening to Ron Paul's podcast today. And Trump is just so disappointing, right? They were talking about his posts about Putin being crazy and Trump going on like, why is he killing people? And it's kind of ridiculous because he had ordered attacks in Yemen, which killed far more people than the attacks that Russia did over the weekend. And plus, Ukraine, who the United States is funding and supplying all of these weapons, apparently launched 700 drones into Russia. Doesn't talk about that. And then he doesn't talk about the tens of thousands of people who are killed in Gaza. And Netanyahu's not crazy, right? Hypocrisy makes a person look silly, childish, ignorant. And the ignorance really knows no limit. As they brought up in the podcast, as a retaliation, Trump seems to consider 500% tariffs on any country that does trade with Russia. And I've said this for, I don't know, maybe at least since 26, so almost 10 years that, when the whole Russia collusion thing happened, we trade with Russia, right? And even the whole time we were like bad mouthing the whole time we were bad mouthing Russia, we were still importing Russian oil through India, right? So we had to pay a lot more because we inserted a middleman in there, right? And I think one way that they did it was they would ship the oil to India. India would refine it and then sell it on to the United States. And so it was a lot more expensive, something like that to make it seem like, oh no, we're not getting our oil from Russia. And it came out today also that Russia supplies a lot of the uranium that the United States needs. And this was a way back when Clinton was Secretary of State under Obama. I talked about this story about how she negotiated a deal with Russia to sell the second largest uranium mine in the United States to Russia, right? No one talks about that now. I remember that when she was secretary. It was just so over the top ridiculous that I made a big deal, but no one else really seemed to care. So, in other words, Trump is saying, oh, we got to go after those Russians for bombing these and killing a much smaller number of people than Trump did himself, right? Being all self-righteous that way. But that means he wants to tariff the United States 500%, right? It's just so silly. And it just makes him look so goofy. Every time I say stuff like this about Trump, I get thumbs down on videos. But come on, that's part of the hypocrisy problem. If you can't see that the problem in the people that you support have, if you can't see it, then you're a hypocrite, right? If you choose to ignore it, you can only see it in your opposition, in the people that you don't like, but you can't see it in yourself or the people that you do like and support. You're a hypocrite. I mean, think about it. When Trump was being railroaded, the target of intelligence agencies, heck, even assassinations, come on. I was hoping that this would wake Trump up to realize that there is a really serious problem. And, when he was doing the whole thing, and my wife was yelling at me earlier today because She said, "You convinced me to think that he was doing some kind of 3D chess, some kind of deep." No, it wasn't. Trump's just being Trump. And it just so happened that certain things, even Doge wasn't his thing. It was Elon Musk who was pushing that. And then when push came to shove, to put it into a bill, Trump just totally ditched it, right? Which basically means then that a lot of the good stuff that was happening early in the Trump administration, yeah, that wasn't him, right? And even the speeches that he gives, which are favorable or which I liked, like the speech he gave in Saudi Arabia against neocons, yeah, he didn't write that, right? He just read it. He probably, after he read it, was like, what did I just say? He probably didn't even understand what he was saying. Uh, but when he was being railroaded 4 years during the Biden administration, I was like, man, I hope he realizes what's going on. And when he comes back and he wins, that he goes after all of these people. Uh, no, he's not doing it, right? He's not even going after the people who, basically made up laws, weaponized laws just simply to go after him, changed parameters of certain laws just so that it made it possible to go after him. I mean, it's terrible. And it's like a Lord of the Rings kind of scenario where, oh, that power is evil. Oh, but if I use it, I can use it for good, right? It's that kind of thing. Tolkien saw the problem of having so much power that it corrupts you. And perhaps for Trump, who already had kind of a big ego, perhaps there was no fight. I mean, he couldn't resist. Um, why is it? And so I wanted to talk about, why is it that people can't see their hypocrisy? I mean, you know, while I was 22 years old, 22, 23 years old, and my little cousin, who was 13 at the time, pointed out my hypocrisy. And from that moment forth, I looked for hypocrisy in my life. And after almost 40 years of looking for hypocrisy in my life, I was able to, discover a lot of them. I mean, it took a long time, and I'm sure that there is still a lot left, but I've come to terms with it, and I'll explain it to you here. So I did a Google search. I looked up, hypocrisy, and they all were kind of lacking. And so rather than use up a lot of time of this episode reading what other people have written, which all kind of missed the mark, I'll just present my explanation of hypocrisy. It's very simple, right? If you look at the dictionary, it says having moral values that you don't actually have, right? Pretending to have moral values that you don't actually have, right? And so you scold other people for lying, but you lie, right? No, let's not make things more complicated than they need to be. All hypocrisy is, in this definition, encompasses all other possible explanations, right? And opens the door for anyone in any field, particularly in psychology, to tweak it according to their needs. But basically, all hypocrisy is a double standard, a standard for one group and a different standard for another group with regards to the same topic, right? So lying, for example, which is pretty easy. Other people are not allowed to lie to me, but I am allowed to occasionally lie to other people, right? So, or colored people, right? They should have preference, right, to certain jobs, but white people, no, you have to go to the back of the line. This kind of double standard you can see everywhere. Sometimes people will call it racism, some people will call it sexism, classism, whatever. It's just double standards, okay? And so I hope you understand what I mean by, once you realize it's just simply double standards, then how people spin it or use it to their advantage, it depends on the context and who's doing it. So, why does it exist? Well, because we have excuses as to why we violate the rules that we impose on other people, right? So, yeah, lying is bad, but I had a good reason, right? So, we have an excuse. I had to. If I didn't, then, right? But it, if we have a good reason, then everyone has a good reason. You see, this is the problem, right? And so, is it that we enforce it because we're better or because we can, right? And there's the operative thing, right? Some people can get away with it because they can, because they have power, they have authority to do so, right? So backtrack a little bit, right? Double standards, they exist. And when you call people out on the double standards, they have to come clean, right? They have to say, "Oh, you're right. Oh, okay." And then there's a choice after that, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But most people, when they drift into hypocrisy, they have a good reason, right? Oh, I have a good reason why I violated the rule, which I have no mercy when other people do it, right? Uh, but usually people are able to get away with it because they have the power to do so. So everyone has reasons and excuses. So either that action that a lot of people are, or the hypocrite is drawing attention to, either it's not wrong or you have to tolerate it when other people do it, right? It's wrong, but occasionally you do it, but you also have to tolerate when other people do it, right? So that let's lying, for example. It's either not wrong, like lying is a part of life, so get over it, right? Or it is wrong. And so that's why you lie occasionally, but you have a good excuse. But then that means you have to tolerate everybody else when they lie. Like you can't get upset about it, right? Because, hey, everyone does it. Um, Now, people generally don't like to eradicate double standards, right? Uh, because it levels the playing field, right? If you are able, you have the power to say, oh, no, no, you can't do it, but then you go and do it, right? But all those people you said they're not allowed to do it. They can't do it ever, but you continue to do it. That hypocrisy exists so that the playing field is not level, right? So if you're able to call out the hypocrisy, then what happens is the playing field gets level. People just don't have that advantage that they enjoyed before, right? In other words, the advantage of power and authority evaporates. And so people like us, libertarians, freedom-minded people, yeah, we want to call out hypocrisy, right? Because the advantage of being able to be hypocritical disappears once you can go after it. Just as a side note, the whole idea of copyright, patents, intellectual property, I feel is closely related. It's like an embryonic thought that one day it will come to maturity and I'll make an episode about it. But think about it. How do you patent an idea, right? How do you copyright an idea? It just doesn't work, right? And so I even told all my students, I don't care if they you know, uh, use my ideas as long as they say, hey, I had this crazy professor once who told me this. That's all I want. So the point is that all of us are hypocrites. We all are. There's no sense in pointing fingers like you're a hypocrite. Oh, all of us are hypocrites, just like all of us are greedy, all of us are racist. We're all hypocrites, okay? We all do the very things we scold and punish other people for. We do that, right? And for anyone to deny it, yeah, this is the problem that we're talking about. How are you able to deny it, right? Uh, and I'm getting to that. As long as we have power, no one can accuse us, right? We go on. Or maybe you say, I don't acknowledge your authority, right? And so you can ignore people who are calling us out on our hypocrisy. And that's the key. Do you suffer punishment for being a hypocrite, right? Is there pain for the hypocrisy? On a personal level, we all suffer for our hypocrisy, right? When people call us out and it's pretty obvious over the top, maybe we lose business. Maybe we lose our friends. Maybe we get a divorce, right? Maybe we lose contact with family members. Maybe you can't have a good time because you're being a hypocrite, right? And so no one wants to hang out with you anymore. There is a direct, immediate punishment for hypocrisy when it is expressed on an individual level. And so we're given a choice. Either we change, right? We stop being a hypocrite, or we tolerate when other people do the very thing that we don't like, right? And so we tolerate them, they tolerate us, and life is good. And as long as in this whole, explanation, as long as we're not crossing the line of property damage, right? Reputation, right? Slander, libel, all that stuff, right? So this is just as long as no damage has been done. But see, things change when you're on a government level. See, they have the protection of law, right? Or the protection of a politician who basically codifies society-wide hypocrisy. They legislate morality. And so once it's a law, there is no punishment. So you can be a hypocrite all day long. When there's no punishment for hypocrisy, you get shallow thinking, right? Power with no wisdom, right? So you have all of this power, all of this authority, and you're being a hypocrite all day long. Yeah, there's no wisdom there. Everyone sees you as a shallow thinker. Some of the things that have been coming out regarding the Russia-United States relationship, especially in with regard to Ukraine, is that most people in Russia think that Trump is a child, thinks that most Americans are just little children that have too much power. You may reject that, but Asians have been thinking that for a very, very long time. And the reason why no one really cared what Asians thought was because America had enough money that they didn't have to care. But now that America is slowly drifting into economic collapse, yet now it matters what other people think of the United States. And, this is what really kind of like, oh, and I say this to all my classes too. Look, if you don't like what people are thinking, right? If you don't like the opinion of other countries that Americans are shallow thinkers, then get wisdom, right? That's what I would say. If you want to have all this power, you need to have the wisdom. You cannot govern. You cannot project goodness. With hypocrisy, you can't do that. We see this shallow thinking with people who have qualified immunity or sovereign immunity, right? In other words, they have no responsibility, and so they engage in even more hypocrisy. You can't do violence to me, but I can do violence to you. Look at government protected monopolies, right? We can't ever have a monopoly, right? We have those antitrust laws. You can't even be successful before people start accusing you of being a monopoly, which in the private sector, you can never truly have a monopoly, right? And but if we are a government protected monopoly, like public transportation, right? That's a government protected monopoly. Competition is illegal. So they can have monopolies. We can't even be successful to have a large market share, right? Which is not a monopoly because competition is still legal. But if we even appear, just by the success of our business, appear to be monopolistic, yeah, then the government comes after us. It's crazy. This whole idea of government protected monopolies, it shows up in government contracts, especially it doesn't matter if it's in science, engineering, public transportation, education, it doesn't matter, right? These are government protected monopolies. Oh, even today, Vince Lancy was talking about the nuclear resurgence because over the weekend, Trump signed this thing where, oh, we got to be more This is national security. What do you call it? It's an emergency. We have to bring back nuclear. But all of that ignores the fact that government impeded nuclear energy development in the first place, right? But now it's coming back, but only because Trump decided, right? All he had to do, right? And by doing so, certain companies are going to be rewarded, right? And so it's not the best companies, but it's the companies that were ready for this because somehow they were telegraphed, right? They have connections with politicians already, and so it's corruption, right? So if Trump was serious about having nuclear energy be a priority, then he would abolish a lot of the regulatory laws, right? He would get rid of them. And that would fast track everything. You would have people competing with the best ideas to do it in the best way possible. For example, thorium, hello, but of course, we're not going to go there because it has to be by the government, right? This hypocritical, authoritarian, you know, low level, shallow thinking method. It's terrible. This is authoritarianism. It's abuse of power. It's injustice. Expressions like what's good for the goose is good for the gander. It's interesting, right? Because and to reiterate a point I made earlier, either the behavior is not wrong, right? So prohibiting one party from doing it is wrong, or if something is truly wrong, then the market will reduce the effects of the bad practice, right? But trying to regulate, put in some laws that will protect unjust behavior, right? So either something's wrong with the behavior, right? What's good for the goose is good for the gander, right? And I guess that's supposed to be something sexual, right? But it doesn't have to be, right? It's basically if you can do it, I can do it. So if that behavior is okay, right? There's nothing wrong with it, then everyone should be allowed to do it, right? There is no advantage anymore in the market. Oh, you have more power, you have more connections, so you get to do it, I can't. Or there is something wrong with it. That's what someone is trying to prevent. But you have another group of people who are allowed to do that with no repercussions. So, what you want is no regulations so that the truly bad nature of that behavior is revealed quickly. And so the effects of the bad behavior are mitigated. But that's not the world that we live in today. We have all these regulations that are there permanently, which creates and magnifies the problem to levels that no one could ever imagine. Like to the point where no one even knows what a thorium reactor is. So Russia bombing targets in Ukraine should have been a wake-up call for Trump's own bombing, right? For him to even just ask, why are you doing it? Not like, I don't know why he's doing it. He's crazy. It's just like so immature. Like a mature person would have said, wait, why? What caused it, right? What would be the reason for him to do this? We're in the middle of peace talks, right? You see that, right? But no, it doesn't do that. Is it because no one points it out to him? Is it because he can't understand it? Or is it because he's too entitled, right? Oh, I'm always right. I'm the best. I'm the greatest, right? And so therefore, I'm never wrong. So therefore, if I think it's wrong, then it's wrong, even, but not when I do it, right? At the end of the day, it is fundamentally unjust. So he's a hypocrite, right? Call him whatever you want. But for me, the biggest damning accusation is the hypocrisy. He's a hypocrite. And so I no longer have any expectation, right? Because hypocrites say anything they want. They do anything they want, and they justify everything that they do. And you have to be some kind of sycophant, right? Some kind of like fanboy, psychotic person to just swallow everything that he serves you. And it's horrible because you know that because he's doing all this, the Democrats are going to regain control of Congress, either in the midterm elections or in 4 years, right? And Democrats, anyway, are just Republicans with more obvious irresponsible attitude towards spending and deficits, right? Who thumb their nose at every law, not just most of them. That's why it's important for us to be consistent and principled. That's why I love Ron Paul, right? Uh, he's consistent, he's principled. That's how you avoid hypocrisy. It's also the long game. It's the game, right? Steering away from hypocrisy keeps our conscience clean, and we can pretty much go anywhere and be welcomed because we're straight shooters. We're honest, right? We admit our mistakes. We tolerate everybody else. So, in this way, hopefully, we'll be able to convince other people to leave the hypocrisy game and live for justice. Do it by example, however that might be. So hopefully this resonates with you. I was just venting a little bit. Just I needed it anyway. All right, that's it for today. I will talk to you next time.